Hi everyone, I'm Ed Greenspon, and I'm delighted to be speaking today with two guests who bring deep experience about the human side of Canada's competitiveness challenge. What changes are needed to keep and grow top talent here? What role will immigration play in filling Canada's talent pool? As you know, Full Circle has been focused on what we call the Leapfrog series. The idea is to explore what it will take to move Canada from what some have characterized as boiling frog syndrome and turn us instead into a leapfrog nation. And of course, there's no leapfrogging without talent, which is why we're speaking today with Vivek Goel, President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Waterloo. Vivek is a public health specialist and remains Professor Emeritus at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health, where he had a distinguished academic career as a professor and administrator. And Vivek was recently awarded the Order of Ontario, the province's highest civilian honor. And also with us today is Zabeen Hirji, an executive advisor with Deloitte. Zabeen works closely with both the private and public sectors on such critical matters as talent, culture, purpose, AI, and the workforce, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Before that, Zabeen served as Chief Human Resources Officer at RBC, Canada's largest bank. And she's also been recognized very recently with an honorary degree from Trent University. So congratulations to both of you. You know, you both lived the talent issue up close and personal, and that's what we want to talk about today. I'm so delighted to have you with us here on the Leapfrog series at Full Circle. So let's get at it.
Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Ed. Delighted to be part of this conversation.
Maybe we could just start more generally with, growing the talent pool, if I can put it that way, is always a matter of concern. But how, do the recent rounds of geopolitical disruption affect the equation? How are they reshaping the issues that we have to look at? Vivek, let's start with you.
So they're reshaping in both directions, so to speak. So, we've often worried about the loss of talent from Canada, the brain drain, particularly to the United States, but, really to many other parts of the world as well, where we have seen some of our top talent go elsewhere in order to have the successful careers that they're seeking. At the same time, recent events are also resulting in people from around the world not necessarily wanting to go to places like the United States. And so we have opportunities to draw people into Canada. I think where there's a real advantage for us in that leapfrog sort of view of thinking is that, if we really want to overcome Canada's productivity gap, what we've been seeing in recent years, we need to use the best minds to improve our productivity. And that's across all sectors, public and private sector, and not-for-profits. And traditionally, I think in the last couple of decades, Canada has tended to take the lazy route, I'll say, and not investing in the innovation and technologies and new methodologies that would allow us to boost productivity, and essentially relying on other countries for those kinds of innovations, even though the fundamental research that was often driving those innovations was coming out of Canada. And I think for me, the talent piece is certainly about continuing to drive the leadership in that research, but also developing the talent that can take that research and the innovations and apply it to improve outcomes for Canadians.
Okay, Zabeen, why don't you weigh in also on what I think many people see as a challenge, but, also there's a kind of galvanizing moment of opportunity here. So how are you seeing it?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll try to be complimentary to what Vivek has covered. And picking up on the productivity theme, absolutely agree it's essential to harness the best minds and to create the conditions where the best minds can actually do their best. I would also add that this really is the time for all hands on deck. And so how do we, in terms of this productivity piece, what do we need to do? And I'm sure we'll get to this a little bit later, but that notion of, the fusion of technology and humans is really, really important. So how organizations are actually bringing those two things together and investing, which is another theme that Vivek spoke about, investing, with, in a way we've not invested before in the ongoing development, upskilling, reskilling of the workforce. And for me, for decades, when you look at organizations and investments, think about technology. It's a natural thing to be continually upgrading your technology. We don't expect something we bought 20 years ago to have any value. There's that constant upgrade. Whereas with human capital, we still have the mindset that once somebody's in the organization, then the development stops, as opposed to this ongoing, very disciplined approach to continually upgrading. So I'd love to come back to that opportunity.
I hope we'll come back to it as well, because I think while we're going to talk about perhaps deficits in skills and talent, a lot of people are concerned that they're not going to get their chance. But let us come back to that. I just want to put you on the ground, though, for a moment, because, June was convocation month in Canada. Vivek is the president and vice chancellor of a major university. You get to see a lot of your graduates. Probably one of the most uplifting moments of anyone's life. And Zabeen, you've also experienced that recently with your honorary degree at Trent. So Vivek, let's start with you. What are you hearing from your students? What's your sense of their mood, and particularly for University of Waterloo, which has been a major source of talent for Silicon Valley, particularly for many years. How is that equation changing, if at all?
It's one of the great things that we have here in Canada is we have these public institutions operating at the quality of some of the leading global institutions, but providing access to a much, much larger proportion of the population. So quality, accessibility at scale. And that's something that's relatively unique for Canada. With those graduates, my sense is a huge amount of optimism. And, our speakers at convocation the honorary degree recipients like Zabeen will often speak about the challenges the world is facing and the optimism that they have with the graduates. And when you listen to the challenges, you kind of get depressed, right? But then you look out at the faces of these graduates and they're ready to go out and solve those really big challenges that the world is facing. To the point you made about Waterloo being a source for talent for technology companies, particularly in Silicon Valley. It's, we're, for many of the largest tech firms, we're amongst the top 5, often the top source of talent, particularly in areas like computer science, software engineering. And, you could see it as it's absolutely wonderful that we're the source of this talent. We're recognized for it. But obviously, we also have to look at it with concern. Why are we losing this talent from Canada? And, I'll also note that with the rise of remote work, our talent now is available to those companies without them having to move them. So, we need to look at why it is that those graduates are choosing to take those jobs. And it is, when you talk with them, they'll look at, first of all, what is my compensation going to look like? And it's often 2 or several times what Canadian companies are able to offer. What is my tax rate? It's often a fraction of what they're going to face if they stay in Canada. So higher compensation, lower tax. what's my ability to buy a house? Don't have to go further on that. So you can't blame the graduates when they look at the full sort of range of what's going to happen. When I talk with those graduates, and particularly if I meet with our alumni in Silicon Valley, many of them would like to come back. They see what's happening in Canada and relative to the United States. They want to come back and contribute. But they'll say if they've been successful with a startup and they want to come back, the tax consequences for them on their capital gains and so on are so significant, they actually can't come back. And so we have to look at this as a package, and the regulatory framework, the tax framework, our social services, our ability to develop housing. If we want to retain the talent, if we want to bring the talent back, it's not just one policy change we have to do. We have to look at the totality that has created this environment where our very best talent is often finding that there's not good opportunities for them in the country.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, Vivek, because, a lot of the conversation, which is often theoretical, abstract, and undertaken by people who actually aren't talking to the folks on the ground, is that, the sense of nationalism, the state of things in the United States is, bringing people back home. But of course, it's a trade-off analysis always. And we need to up our side of the trade. So I want to come back to some of those points at all. But Zabeen, I just want to, for a moment, what were you hearing at TRIP? What was your sense of graduates and the sense of where Canada lies now vis-a-vis the United States?
The graduates were from the business program, the BBAs and the Masters of Management. And so kind of broadening this to there's the tech sector, which has tentacles into everything. But if I really look at the broader group, absolutely, the optimism and this sense of we can make a difference, we can solve big problems, and that sort of energy was there. For many of them, they wish to stay in Canada, and the differentials in compensation, et cetera, are not the same in general. I mean, there's always people kind of at the top end, but I think the opportunity for us, for organizations and institutions, is how do we bring them into organizations and actually let them do that kind of work. Again, a lot of it is around mindset with the changes, in technology, with AI, the whole hierarchy, the structure is changing. People, we're moving to a hierarchy of knowledge, and how does that play out versus hierarchy in the traditional way of level?
Do you see businesses adjusting to those changes you're talking about for their workforces?
Not adjusting quickly enough. I mean, there's some great examples of organizations who work with interns and have, programs where interns are given real world big issues to solve, because two things happen with that. One is of course, you get good potential solutions. But the other thing is you start to change the organizational culture. When people that might have been there longer, worked in a certain way, all of a sudden see these models of how do we, with a sense of urgency, with this hierarchy of knowledge, move on solving problems in different ways. That means we need to do this in the broader organization as well, because I think there's a huge culture change aspect to what we're talking about as well.
I want to go back to Vivek and what you were saying about, people wanting to come home, but the bar not being receptive enough. Let's put it that way. So first off, are you able to measure or give us some sense of what inquiries sound like from U.S. scholars who may want to come here, Canadians who might want to return? I mean, is that level picking up even before you get to the obstacles?
So certainly the level is picking up. I would say, if we talk about our alumni, I think there's always a flow back and forth. People come, and again, the motivations for individuals will be many. A 23-year-old graduate will go off someplace, but when they have kids and their parents are getting a little older, they often want to come back. And so the barriers become different. But so those kinds of inquiries have always been there and will always come. And I think the point about scholars, we're getting, everyone is getting calls from people that they know, particularly again in the United States. I think at this stage, most people in the United States are just trying to get their options. What could I do if things get really worse? So people, I think, are waiting to see what's going to actually happen before they uproot themselves and move. I think at the level of students, we're certainly starting to get some sense that, our early indicators that our offer acceptance rate is a little bit higher than past years. We have inquiries now for late applications from students who might have had an admission to a U.S. university, particularly if they're coming from one of the countries that had just been put on the ban list. They're saying, well, can I come to Canada instead? So again, it's very early on that because remember, our admission cycle started last fall. So all of these changes have actually just happened as we're wrapping up the current admission cycle. I expect we're going to see a very different pattern this fall as we get into our admission cycle for undergraduate, graduate students, and postdocs, because the talent from around the world that would have been going to the United States is going to be looking for at least to have an alternative ready in case things continue to change for the worse in the United States. So I think we're just at the start of what's going to happen with the changes in the United States.
Well, again, before we get to the strategies to attract them, which I want to talk about, we, again, probably have to think about some of the things that place barriers. And one of the things has been, the change in immigration that has occurred in the country. The change in attitudes that occurred very suddenly as large numbers came in and upset the housing market. So have we overreached, I guess, when it comes to international students? And is another adjustment going to have to be made to take advantage of the kinds of opportunities you're talking about?
Yeah, I'll say we have overreached and we've used a very blunt instrument, right? We put global caps on the number of international students and temporary foreign workers without really looking with any sense of precision at what we need as a country. And so, I'll go back and say, Canada was a global leader in its immigration model, the points-based system, get the very best talent in the world. And then couple that with post-secondary education as a pathway for getting that very best talent, particularly at the graduate level. And again, to think about the fact that we do international education for a number of reasons. Having that diverse community in our classes enhances the experience for all of our students, particularly for our domestic students, because they get to interact with people from around the world. Those international students, even if they don't stay in Canada, become our ambassadors globally. Businesses, you'll often find that they build partnerships with people that have been educated in Canada, and that helps open up markets globally. And then finally, again, through the postgraduate work permit program and the pathways to permanent residency and then citizenship, we use post-secondary education to create a pathway for that very best talent to stay and work in companies in Canada, work in the public sector, and build companies, right? And we have a disproportionate share of our founders are international graduates.
I think we want to get correct because, I'm hearing from you this mismatch, this kind of very odd mismatch of opportunity to attract some of the top talent in the world, some of the top talent that would have gone to the United States not being welcomed there anymore. And at the same time, we're not really making it welcoming now, perhaps for what were good reasons, but the playing field has changed, so, how do we keep up with that? And if you park that thought for a moment, because that's where we're going to go next, but I also just want to think of the talent that we have within our midst. And Zabeen, I just wonder if we're even developing and using the talent that's easily available to us.
We are doing good things. If you look at, for example, investments that organizations make in ongoing development and reskilling and also in creating, it's more than that. It's also the environments where people can actually use those talents and skills. We don't stack up very well against OECD countries, for example. We need to elevate that agenda to much more to the board level, to the senior management level. Think about boards and how much time is spent on financial management and review. Of course, it's important. Most of it is looking in the rearview mirror, conversations where the value is actually created, where the differentiation and competitive edge can grow. That gets very little time on agendas, and we don't have standardized approaches in at governance and senior management levels to really manage that in the same way we have for the financial management, risk management, et cetera. So this, for me, all speaks to this elevating the talent management agenda as a top priority, and a huge part of that is skills and development. We've got lots of expertise. We've got expertise on the academic side, and we need to bring business. This is the other overarching theme: business, academia, governments, not-for-profits. There's this idea of collaboration and co-creation, which, again, we have good examples. That is the only way that we can solve for this and dramatically turn things around. And I would like to see leaders stepping up from all sectors, because I think this is a really urgent issue. We are at a crossroad where there is some momentum and energy around what are we going to do to build a stronger, better, more inclusive Canada.
Well, certainly universities are engines of growth for the entire economy, and particularly in their communities. What we do have to talk about are the strategies for building on the opportunity. In recent decades, I think we've had strategies. We had Millennium Scholarships. We had Canada Research Chairs. We had Banting Scholarship. What do we need to do today, Vivek, in order to take this? And I don't just mean the opportunity, but I mean, if we're going to leapfrog, if we're going to have leverage points, if we're going to make up some of that lost GDP that might come from other places, what is the plan? And is anybody developing a plan?
So, and certainly we absolutely need to continue to support the post-secondary institutions and support students for success through scholarships, ensure that we have the resources to recruit top faculty, ensure that they have adequate research funding and so on. But I'll take a step further and, really build it on that lifelong talent development theme that Zabeen was talking about, that we also need to ensure that every Canadian has an opportunity to keep up to date with the latest disruptive technologies. And obviously, AI is on everyone's mind, but I think we have to recognize that the pace of change in the coming years is just going to be faster and faster. So it's AI, there's robotics, there's quantum, there's nano. They're just going to be coming at us year after year. And so what does it mean to ensure that every Canadian is ready for these technologies? Basic literacy in those technologies, right? And so they don't have to be an expert, but they need to understand how to use it. So, do we have online modules available and make them available for every Canadian? So there are other countries in the world that are doing these sorts of things.
The things that you're describing that we need to remedy, they're also, right now, youth unemployment is over 11%. It's at, late 1990s levels. And there's some evidence and, in some places that the, wage advantage that educated Canadians or Americans or wherever in the world you are enjoyed has narrowed, or even in some cases the growth is lower for them. Do you worry at all that universities, with the AI effects, with other effects, might lose their constituency, their political constituency?
Universities are losing their political constituency, and again, look at what's happening south of the border, but even look at the level of support that we have here. But I would actually argue the opposite, in the sense that as more and more entry-level tasks are taken up by AI, the requirement for people to have that set of creative skills, ability to think critically, to supervise the agents, like that's the world that we're moving to. Humans are going to be supervising AI agents. I think the need for the kind of education that universities provide, and particularly an institution like the University of Waterloo provides, is going to increase. So I agree with you, like we are going to go through a period of disruptive change where that youth unemployment is going to unfortunately increase, because we have to get through the shift in the economy. But going back to my point about spreading out these disruptive technologies, the biggest part of our economy, the largest number of firms in our economy, are small and medium enterprises. They're the ones that we really need to help with AI adoption, because as an example, as they start to use those tools and improve their productivity, it's going to create new jobs in our economy. And we can't imagine what that's going to look like. But if we don't actually sort of look at that democratization of these disruptive technology tools, that's where we're going to continue to fall behind, right?
Is this a conversation that you think is taking place in government?
I think we are starting literally in the last few weeks. I think we're finally starting to see people talking about this. I would say, again, with respect to AI, the last few years, our conversations about AI have tended to be on what's the right regulatory framework. In essence, how do we hold it back? How do we get data centers? Important things. But this conversation about how we actually help people adopt these tools, we have to pay attention to all the other issues, regulatory, ethics, energy utilization. But if we don't also pay attention to this aspect of how do we actually move it out, we're going to spend all our time worrying about what not to do.
Zabeen, I see you nodding, and I wonder, how companies are prepared or not prepared for this, and even if they have the management talent to turn this to advantage.
Yeah, I was nodding because Vivek was talking like a CHRO. But I guess that's what you are, really. In, if you think about your role as a university president, it's all about human resources and talent. So the leading organizations are really going all in with determining how they're going to use AI in their organizations. It's not just about the skills, but it's about how are you actually changing the work that people are doing. But the key message here and the learnings are, so you have on the one hand, building AI fluency. And I actually like to use the term fluency, but not in the context of coding, et cetera, but how do you get really good at using AI, and particularly Gen AI, if I think about the broader workforce and for life, because the productivity outside of our work life also impacts our overall productivity. But really that includes what we normally think about, how to use the tools and the prompts and all that sort of thing. But it's also the ethics and understand and building the capacity for critical thinking. How do you question things? How do you engage with others in your coworkers when you're concerned about the reliability of the information that you're getting? But the biggest investment the successful companies are making is in the change management. And that is about being transparent with employees. We can't say, well, it's sort of going to affect your work, but we need to put it out there that there are a lot of positive impacts, but the data shows us 60-70% of jobs are going to be impacted in one way or another. So how do you build that relationship with employees through that transparency and then saying, and this is how we're going to help you get there? And there are some organizations, and some of whom are, they're public about this, where they've had the conversations with their employees is, we will help you get there. But if you can't get there, then there may not be a job for you.
Vivek, we're in the home stretch now, and we need to solve the problem. There was a time when the country talked mostly about resourcefulness and not resources. Obviously, we need to move forward on not one or the other. And I'm seeing a lot of action on resources. I'm not feeling the same kind of thing on resourcefulness. You tell us that in the last few weeks you're starting to feel it. What is it going to look like so that we can win at this talent game and move the country forward at a time of vulnerability?
Yeah, so, and I would maybe say, let's be resourceful with our resources. And by that, I mean, okay, yeah, we're spending a lot of time worrying about how do we get oil to Tidewater so we can sell it, the crude oil. Why aren't we thinking about refining the resources and adding value to them and then selling them to the world? Use the example that's out there, aluminum. We manufacture aluminum sheets, send them to the States. They turn them into aluminum cans and we bring them back into the country. Why aren't we using our talent to figure out how we can use AI and robotics to make the most efficient and best quality aluminum cans in the world, and use the aluminum we manufacture in Canada based on our natural resources and sell it around the world? So one example, but we could take critical minerals, energy resources, everything that we have. We should be using our talent to figure out how we refine it, turn it into products that the world needs at a price that nobody else can match. And so that's not what we've been doing. We have, again, had the luxury of having this back and forth across the U.S. border without having had to worry about how we most effectively use our resources. And doing that is going to require talent across many different kinds of skill sets.
I just keep finding fascinating that it's a bit of a buyer's market for talent, and I'm just not too sure that we're in buying mode yet. And I wish your university particularly good fortune and your own wisdom, the wisdom that policy supports us, because I think that's going to spell a big difference. Vivek, I want to thank you for being with us today. Zabeen is going to stay around for a debrief on this discussion. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom.
Great. Well, it's great to be here. Bye.
Okay, we're back with Zabeen Hirji, and we've had a great conversation with a lot of insights. And Zabeen, we've got to scale it down a little bit. So I want you to tell me what you think some of the important takeaways to you are.
Yeah. One of the issues that is rapidly accelerating is what's happening to entry-level jobs. So here I'm talking about knowledge worker roles, generally for youth students graduating from university. What's changing in the marketplace is we're seeing a rise in organizations looking for 2 to 5 years of experience, for example, in these entry-level jobs. So these would be jobs as analysts in finance or consulting or pick a profession. And of course, that's not possible. When you're just graduating, you're not going to have that kind of experience. But the reason for that is that AI is starting to augment a lot of that work. So you think about making PowerPoint presentations or doing basic analysis. That's something where individuals can really tap into AI and agentic, and it's a rapidly changing area. So the call to action for me here is what's needed so that the higher education institutions, universities, colleges are able to fill some of that experience gap during their education, how we're using work integrated learning, internships, co-ops, and what's going to change there. And then what's the role of organizations in actually bridging from their graduation to moving into these roles without that 2 to 5 year experience, because it's not possible. And just think about the tens of thousands of graduates we have every year that will experience some of this. And that's where we've seen the unemployment rate of people with post-secondary degrees at its highest level in 20 years at 11.2%. And we will need all players. We will need higher ed, employers, both private sector, business, and public sector, who are huge employers, the not-for-profit sector, so that we make sure we bring everybody along, and of course, higher ed. And I think that we don't have a long period of time. It's not a long runway for us to redesign how we're going to simulate and develop those skills, through simulations, through actual experience, to get the people into entry-level jobs without the formal, traditional full-time experience.
It's an interesting kind of pincer movement on the country and on its workers, in a sense that all of this that's happening from AI would be happening regardless, and we would have to be coping with it. But on top of that, we have the competitive challenge of how we're going to reorient our economy so it's makes up for any losses of the geopolitical uncertainty or different has on it. So we got to do both of those at the same time. I think they're pointing in the same direction in any case, but I think it means that we kind of got to get on our horse and really start galloping, right?
Yeah, well said.
We're no doubt going to be having a talk about these things a lot more, but, I think it's great that you're giving guidance to companies and knowledge that you've acquired to help them get on the right path. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And I'm delighted that you're having these kinds of conversations, because they are and need to be mainstream conversations, not sidebar conversations. So thank you for elevating.
Thank you. Okay, that was a rich and timely and freewielding conversation. One that crystallizes that Canada must move beyond relying on reputation and the past ways of doing things in a very, very different world. And we need to think about what competitiveness looks like today and how, as Vivek said, we need to bring resourcefulness to everything we do. And we need to move more quickly to adopt if we're going to be gaining the advantages that we need to possibly make up for some of the vulnerabilities we have. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on Full Circle, the Leapfrog series. I'm Ed Greenspon.